May, welcome to Between the Guidelines. It's great to have you on.
Thank you for having me.
I would love to learn a bit more about you and your role as Head of Public Policy at Bitpanda.
Yeah, sure. So I lead on UK public policy for Bitpanda, and my day-to-day essentially looks like a few different things. Firstly, a core part of my role at the moment is influencing the regulatory regime that will be finalised this year. The second part is working closely with the government departments and politicians to ensure that crypto and digital asset policy is prioritised and also promoted. And I guess the third part is, I think, public policy in this space right now. There's a big part for education and dispelling myths on the industry, which I guess in some industries wouldn't fall to public policy, but there's still a massive part on changing and influencing the narrative that I think falls into a public policy domain.
And in terms of those three areas, then influencing and meeting people and then demystifying, if you like, what does that look like day to day at Bitpanda? Are you hosting events? Are you going to events? Are you writing papers? Like how do you actually do that influencing?
Yeah, I would say every day is different for me. It could vary from meeting a politician and talking about a specific issue or concern. It could be an event or a panel. It could be a Bitpanda hosted an event, so we did a roundtable in the House of Lords last year, or it could be at the moment there's a whole raft of consultations, and that's a really important part of the job right now and of the public policy discussion. And then finally thought leadership and papers, so we do a massive amount of myth busting and thought leadership in Europe, so we're bringing that to the UK. Our expertise from Europe adds something a little bit different to the UK, and we're definitely trying to bring that to the UK.
Okay. So in terms of the changes that are coming in with the consultation papers that were released in December and the gateway that's opening in September this year, what do you think firms of the market are underestimating the most?
Yeah, there's a critical window now between firms responding to the consultations, understanding what it means for them, to the FCA publishing their policy statements in the summer this year, and then for firms to be prepared for the gateway to open on the 30th of September. It sounds like plenty of time, but for a firm to understand exactly how the regulation applies to them, and it's not one size fits all, and the FCA regulates per activity. So, different firms will face different questions, and will probably need to get some clarification answers from the FCA, which is great. They've opened a application service in July to support firms. So I guess, to answer your question in terms of what are firms underestimating, it is that sort of understanding that timeline doesn't give us a lot of time. And it gives us a window to understand the breadth and depth of the detailed regulation, but I think there's a big part for industry to play in working together, because there will be some challenges that come out down the line. New regulatory regimes are never clear-cut, straightforward. There will be gaps. But I think there is an onus on industry to work together to try and fill those.
And just in terms of trying to paint the picture of what these incoming regulations mean a little bit, obviously you've got the gateway, which is for firms that want to become directly authorised for crypto products in the UK. But other things like financial promotions or other aspects of the regulatory landscape, will the incoming crypto regulations cover those as well? And what is the takeaway for firms beyond just getting directly authorised?
Yeah, it's a good question. There are, so on top of the new regulatory regime, there will be existing elements of the FCA's regulation that apply to firms. So, as you rightly mentioned, financial promotions is a major one in the UK. It really requires a firm to think about how they're communicating and the purpose of their communication. The second part is the consumer duty, for example, that will continue to exist. And I know the FCA is thinking about how to reform or rethink about consumer duty, but that all sort of sits alongside the new regime coming into place. So I think, it's not just about taking the crypto asset regulations on face value. We need to see how everything hangs together, including, the existing regulations, the, money laundering regulations on top of the regime to understand exactly what it looks like to firms. So I think, the UK is renowned for having detailed and thorough financial services regulation. And so that expertise is really important, I think, for firms.
And stepping away from the income regulations for a second and back to your role, how much of it, alongside the influencing piece, is about the education or demystifying aspect? We've seen enforcement actions, situations like FTX, and these sorts of things. So obviously, there's advocates for crypto and there's those that maybe are still concerned about it. So how much of your role is that demystifying aspect, and what does that entail? What do you do to try and help people overcome that?
Yeah, I think there is a massive part at the moment on demystifying and financial education. It's something, for Bitpanda, financial education is core, and we're not there yet. And it's all about how do we get politicians, regulators to understand the day-to-day of consumers and firms alike. I think like a good example in the UK is we had a couple of weeks ago the Rycroft review, and the outcome of that was banning crypto donations to political parties. And for me, that's an important demonstration of the demystifying we still need to do on crypto and digital assets. You and I know that, crypto allows full transparency and traceability. But the implications of some of the statements in the report haven't fully considered the benefits of crypto. And also, I think from my perspective, it's about equal treatment for fiat and crypto. Going back to the FCA sort of one of their key principles is, same risk, same regulatory outcome. And I think we need to apply that to, demystifying the policy conversation. I do think a big part of demystifying in education is starting to talk about crypto, digital assets, stablecoins in mainstream discussions on investment, financial inclusion in particular. So the government, published their financial inclusion strategy in November last year. I think the strategy was very strong in understanding the changes in investment behaviors and investment trends. One thing that, we really wanted to see in there was more on, crypto and digital assets and the role that they play in modern investment behaviors. We're finding through some of our polling that under 35s are using crypto and digital assets for their long-term investments. And so if we're thinking about, not just the future of capital markets in the UK, but the future of investment and financial inclusion, that really needs to include crypto. And it's already playing a role. It's just about ensuring that that's now included in policy and in some of the regulatory considerations as well.
Yeah, the statistic about under 35s using crypto as a long-term investment strategy is super interesting. Are there any other trends you're seeing across the market?
Yeah, it's interesting you asked that. So through our recent polling, we found that 39% of under 35s are using AI to make their crypto investments. And it comes back to that point on financial education. As Bitpanda, we have our academy, and that's an important part of financial education, keeping it relevant and accessible. But it's interesting that, a large proportion of the under 35s are still using AI to access their information. So there is some way to go in order to ensure that there are a variety of sources to enable, consumers under 35s or any consumer to make their decisions.
And with that stat, so with AI, is that using, I don't know, LLMs to ask investment questions, or is that in-app kind of chatbots? Like, what sources make up that percent of people using AI to decide on their strategies?
I don't think we got into the specifics, but I imagine it is LLMs. It is something I've heard anecdotally, and as I say, like that's a source of information. But there are other tools out there, and I guess coming back to some of the communication challenges at the moment, I think there's definitely some way to go to ensure that consumers are able to access sources, credible sources like, our academy, for example.
And does your role, obviously, sort of at Bitpanda covers all of the crypto regs, but what about how the SA views AI, for example? Does your role touch into those different technologies, or is it purely focused on policy as it relates to crypto?
At the moment, policy as it relates to crypto, but as you know, new technologies and the application of regulation to new technologies, it heavily overlaps. And I think if we're thinking about economic growth and economic opportunities, we can't think of crypto, digital assets, AI separately. They are sort of still considered, particularly in the sort of policy space, as emerging technologies that governments and regulators need to capitalize. So although it's not part of our sort of day-to-day discussion with the FCA, it's definitely a key part of thinking about how we can promote new technologies.
So Eric mentioned that he wants the UK market to be one of the biggest for Bitpanda in the next 1 to 2 years. What drove that decision to enter the UK market and make it such a big play for Bitpanda, given the dominance across Europe?
Yeah, so a number of reasons. I think predominantly we recognise that the UK is one of the global financial services hubs. And, it really has led on regulation, driving innovation in capital markets, and we recognise that it has the potential to do so. I think also, as I say, investment behaviours are advanced in the UK, so that's definitely a motivation. I think secondly, we have such a great European presence as Bitpanda, and truly encompassing all of Europe was an ambition for us. Despite having left the EU, we're still part of that sort of Europe collaboration. The UK and Europe have a summit coming up in June. Like, there's a lot of collaboration and a lot of, I think, regulatory alignment actually in the approaches between the two. And lastly, the UK has real potential for growth, adoption of digital assets, and if we truly get the regime right in the next few months, it could really see and the UK becoming that hub for, I mean, it's already a hub for financial services, but to include crypto and digital assets is a real hope for us. And we're still hopeful that can be the case.
So Bitpanda launched in the UK with over 600 assets on the platform. Was that a deliberate competitive strategy or just a result of being live across Europe?
So bringing our product to the UK was essentially an extension of the offering that we have in Europe, and we already recognized that our offering in Europe was leading and competitive. And we, it was proven through our operations in Europe, and we wanted to bring that to the UK. I think I would just layer that with the other thing that we bring, apart from, the number of assets and a leading product, is also our leading approach in how we've operated in the EU. We have always championed regulatory excellence, and so not only was it about bringing a leading product to the UK, but about bringing that same approach to the UK, where we're now sort of bringing that balanced approach of ensuring that we have innovation and a market that encourages growth, whilst also being conscious that we need to balance it with, with consumer protection and, market integrity, all these things that matter for the long-term growth of the sector.
In terms of challenges, trying to replicate that regulatory excellence from Europe to the UK, what do you think, the challenges are ahead?
Yeah, I think regulatory clarity is a big one for us. I think, as I mentioned, we've got this small window to understand what the future regime will look like, then to think about how it will apply to different firms, and then to rattle ahead of the go-live date in October 2027. Alongside that, there are existing regulatory principles that we need to gain clarity on. So I think that's a big part. I think there is an ongoing role on ensuring that crypto and digital assets are promoted in our financial services strategies in the UK, in our economic growth strategies. That's really important to encourage the growth of the sector. An example is the government published their financial services growth and competitiveness strategy in the summer last year. And all of the elements of that, whether it's the UK being a global financial services hub, for example, all needs to include crypto and digital assets in it. In order for the whole sector to thrive. I mean, this isn't about, currently we're talking about the next sort of 2 years, but this is about the long-term trajectory of the industry over the next 5 to 10 years. And encouraging crypto and digital assets to be in that strategy is really important.
And it's a good segue into the next sort of area I'd like to focus on, which is UK regulations versus what currently exists in Europe. We saw quite a few crypto players leave the UK as a market when the regs were announced. So I would be curious to hear from your perspective, when you're looking at the UK regulations against MiCA or other existing European regulations, what the major differences are, or at least where they're aligned in or completely different.
Yeah, I think at its core, MiCA and the forthcoming regulatory framework in the UK are different in the sense that MiCA was built to be a standalone framework, whereas in the UK, as you'll know, we're incorporating crypto-specific rules into FSMA. So with that comes a variety of different challenges. But I think there are differences and definitely a number of lessons learned. but also, I mean, different regulatory complexity. So let's take stablecoin regulation. In the UK, we're now talking about two different frameworks. A Bank of England regulatory framework in the case of systemic stablecoins, and the FCA framework. And understanding that intricate level of detail, I think it is what makes the UK world leading for its regulation, but it also adds a layer of complexity. Whereas if we're thinking about MiCA, if a stablecoin is deemed significant, whilst it has regulatory oversight from the EBA, it still has the same regulatory framework, regardless of whether it's significant or not significant. So, as I say, there are very different challenges and I guess regulatory intricacies to consider. One of the differences that we're interestingly now seeing are the prudential requirements for firms, and MiCA and the UK's current proposal do differ. So with MiCA, it is the highest of what's known as a permanent minimum requirement or a fixed overheads requirement that's required for prudential requirements. Whereas in the UK, we have a sort of detailed proposal being considered, which is considering what's known as K factors. And these K factors address any possible risks based on the impact it may have on a firm. And it's very complicated, and it is an approach that probably is mirroring MiFID style requirements, but it brings an added challenge that we haven't seen with MiCA. So, there is no clear answer on which one is more complicated, which one is more challenging. I think there are regulatory learnings from both, and also equally regulatory challenges with both. And I think, one of the important things for us going forward, and I think this will be the case across the board, is interoperability. So MiCA's obviously had that head start in the EU, and the UK is will be there by next year. We have the US also mirroring a sort of similar timeline. And actually, do these regulatory regimes work together? And for a global firm, what does that mean? And there are so many complexities, whether it's thinking about liquidity, or whether it's thinking about the presence of an international firm. But I think there are a lot of things to consider, and we will only know what that looks like when we can see all the regimes sitting together. And I think there will be some work to do to ensure that there is interoperability.
That was going to be my next question, which was, are the regulations positioning the UK as a competitive place for companies like Bitpanda to enter? I guess for you it is. The regulatory clarity helps, but for the market as a whole, is it a real opportunity to bring the right crypto players to the UK from abroad?
I think we're moving in the right direction. The potential is definitely there. And I mentioned to you earlier that the motivation for launching in the UK was, the financial services expertise, the excellence in the UK, deep capital markets, institutional excellence that we have in the UK. And if we truly embrace whether that's, stable coins and the future of tokenization, or just digital assets and their ability to contribute to economic growth and long-term investment, then I think we can get there. I don't think, there has been a narrative that, we're not moving quick enough. I don't think that's quite right. I think, getting the regulation right and competitive and compelling is very important. So if we have until October 2027, that means that this year is very important to get that right. We do truly believe that we can get there in the UK, but as I mentioned, everything that was mentioned in the financial services growth and competitiveness strategy needs to be incorporating crypto and digital assets into it. So whether that's leveraging fintech leadership, thinking about investment decisions, thinking about the UK as a competitive financial services hub, you can't have that without crypto and digital assets. So I think truly being able to embed that in the government's policy decisions and the regulatory framework could keep the UK there. But as I say, this year is the critical window to keeping the UK competitive.
And in terms of outside the UK, EU, and then think about the US, for example, does Bitpanda, or do you have a view on that side of things as well, in terms of where the US market might or might not become an opportunity too?
Less about the UK being like a business opportunity, more like what does the UK look like? The US look like?
Like from your experience, I guess, what have you learned about the US market when it comes to this type of regulation for crypto and the behaviours there from the regulators and also consumers?
Yeah, I think we're obviously seeing an interesting debate in the US right now, and we're keeping a close eye on it. I think what is commendable, and I met Commissioner Hester Peirce last year, is the ambition that comes from the SEC and the CFTC. It's there. There is a clear ambition to really propel the crypto and digital asset sectors. They are seen as they are considered as leading regulators in terms of their ambition, and I think that is commendable, and that is something to definitely look out for. I would say, in terms of timelines, if you think about the Genius Act and stablecoins, actually the policy will be agreed very much on similar timelines to the UK, but it is less about the policy and more about the sort of ambition and that willingness to give new, not even new, but give products and firms an opportunity to thrive where they have demonstrated that they are, regulatory compliant or championing regulatory excellence. I think we're at real risk of restricting innovation by putting guardrails on firms before understanding how the market can thrive. So that's one thing I would say that we can learn in the UK from the US, in that, if we give, for example, stablecoin policy an opportunity, or rather the stablecoin market an opportunity to thrive, and for GBP-backed stablecoins to thrive, then we can think about, well, actually, what are the regulatory parameters we need based on the market? And I think just to cover stable coins, because they are still a buzzword, I think that we're using a lot in the industry right now, and that is because it is about the sovereignty, or I guess the ability for currencies to stay relevant. I think, you'll know this, 99% of stable coins are dollar backed right now. if we're thinking about the future of the UK and staying competitive, I think we need to think about how we ensure that GBP continues to stay relevant and continues to show that leadership. And that is all about the policy letting the market thrive whilst having continuous dialogue with the regulators. I don't think necessarily the SEC or the CFTC just has like no parameters. It's more that, you know, I know that the SEC had a series of roadshows last year across different states in the US, really thinking about what is it that firms are concerned about, what is it that they'd like to see unblocked. And I think there's definitely some lessons learned there.
That was really thought-provoking, and I appreciate your insights. That's all we have time for, but it was lovely having you on. Thank you so much
for having me.
For joining.
Thank you.